pizza delivery, midnight shift. The rain came down in sheets, drumming on the roof of the car as Liam Wells squinted through the windshield. His wipers struggled to keep up, leaving streaks of water across the glass. The clock on the dashboard glowed 12:07 a.m. in eerie green light. The graveyard shift at Pietro's Pizza, the worst hours, the worst customers, and tonight, the worst weather. Liam tapped his fingers impatiently on the steering wheel as he pulled into a near-empty gas station. He grabbed a crumpled order slip from the passenger seat, his eyes scanning the address. 105 Harper Road. It was way out on the outskirts of town, past the main streets and deep into the old industrial district, a place most people avoided after dark. Last one for the night, Liam thought, tossing the slip back onto the seat. He had been working this job for 6 months, long enough to know that nothing good happened on late-night deliveries. He'd been stiffed on tips, barked at by drunk customers, and even chased by an overprotective German shepherd more than once. But something about this order felt different. The handwriting on the slip was shaky, hurried, and the name, Emily Price. It sounded familiar, though he couldn't place it. With a sigh, Liam pulled back onto the road, the headlights cutting through the rain-soaked darkness. The streets grew quieter the farther he drove, the buildings thinning out into empty lots and forgotten warehouses. Harper Road wasn't just isolated, it was abandoned. Liam glanced at the GPS on his phone, the blue dot creeping closer to the destination. Only a few more turns. Then he could head home, crack open a beer, and forget this miserable night. But as he turned onto the final stretch of road, his stomach tightened. The house at 105 Harper Road stood at the end of the block, surrounded by tall, dead trees. The yard was overgrown and wild, the driveway cracked and full of puddles. The windows were dark, and the porch light flickered weakly, casting shadows that seemed to shift with the wind. Liam pulled into the driveway, killing the engine. For a moment, he sat in silence, listening to the rhythmic tapping of rain on the roof. The house felt wrong, like it had been forgotten by time. Grabbing the pizza box, Liam stepped out into the rain, the cold water soaking through his jacket. He trudged up the driveway, careful to avoid the deeper puddles, and made his way to the front door. The porch creaked under his weight. The smell of wet wood filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of rotting leaves. Liam knocked twice. The sound echoed through the empty street. For a long moment, nothing happened. No footsteps, no sound of locks turning. Just silence. Liam shivered, glancing over his shoulder. The street behind him was pitch black, illuminated only by the dim glow of his car's headlights. He knocked again, harder this time. Finally, the door creaked open. A woman stood in the doorway. Emily Price. She looked nervous. Her eyes darted toward the street before settling on Liam, her expression tight with unease. Her hair was damp and tangled, her clothes wrinkled and loose, as if she hadn't slept in days. But what struck Liam most was the fear in her eyes. It wasn't just anxiety, it was the look of someone being hunted. Liam forced a smile, holding up the pizza box. Pietro's Pizza, $24.95. Emily hesitated, glancing over her shoulder into the house. The shadows inside were deep and impenetrable, the hallway stretching into darkness. After a long pause, she pulled a few crumpled bills from her pocket and handed them to Liam, her fingers trembling slightly. As she took the pizza, her eyes met his. And then she asked the question, "Have you ever felt like you're being followed?" Liam blinked. "What?" The words hung in the air, heavy and strange. Her tone was serious, not casual, not playful. It was a warning. Not really," Liam said awkwardly, shifting on his feet. He tried to laugh it off. "Not unless I'm late on a delivery." Emily didn't smile. Her gaze lingered on him for a moment before she nodded slowly, almost to herself. "It's a terrible feeling." Without another word, she stepped back inside and closed the door. The lock clicked into place, leaving Liam standing alone on the porch, drenched and uneasy. Liam jogged back to his car, eager to be done with the night. The rain hammered harder, turning the windshield into a blur of water and streaked wiper marks. As he pulled out of the driveway, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Her words echoed in his mind. "Have you ever felt like you're being followed?" Liam tried to brush it off. Customers said weird things all the time. Maybe she was drunk, or paranoid. But deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. As he drove through the dark, empty streets, his headlights caught movement. A figure stood on the sidewalk just at the edge of the light. Tall, still, watching. Liam's breath caught in his throat. Did I just see that? He glanced in the rearview mirror. The figure was gone. Just rain and shadows. Liam shook his head, forcing a laugh. "I'm losing it." But as he turned onto the main road, he couldn't shake the feeling. Something, or someone, was out there, watching. The next morning, Liam sat at his small kitchen table, eating dry cereal straight from the box. His apartment was silent, save for the distant hum of traffic outside. He absent-mindedly scrolled through his phone, already preparing himself for another night of deliveries. A news notification popped up on his screen. Missing local woman, last seen on Harper Road. Liam froze. His thumb hovered over the headline as his heart began to pound in his chest. Slowly, he clicked on the article. The screen loaded, revealing a grainy photo of a woman. Emily Price. Liam's stomach twisted. The article detailed how Emily's car had been found, abandoned near the old industrial district, her phone left inside. No sign of her, no leads. She was gone, and Liam knew he was the last person to see her alive. The cereal box tumbled from his hands, spilling across the table. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his daze. It was a number he didn't recognize. Reluctantly, he answered. Hello? A voice on the other end was calm but firm. Liam Wells? Yeah, who's this? Detective Marcus Hale. I'm with the local precinct. I need to ask you some questions about a delivery you made last night. Liam's mouth went dry. Is this about that missing woman? There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Yes, Emily Price. You were the last person to see her. An hour later, Liam found himself sitting in a cramped, dimly lit office at the police station. Detective Hale sat across from him, his sharp eyes watching Liam carefully. Hale was tall and broad-shouldered, with graying hair and a demeanor that screamed no nonsense. He flipped through a thin file on his desk, occasionally glancing up at Liam. You work at Pietro's Pizza, correct? Liam nodded. And you delivered to 105 Harper Road last night? Yeah. Hale leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. Tell me exactly what happened. Liam recounted the delivery, the long drive, the rundown house, the strange conversation. He hesitated for a moment before mentioning Emily's question. She asked me if I ever felt like I was being followed. Hale raised an eyebrow. Did she say anything else? Liam shook his head. No, that's it. She seemed nervous, like she was scared of something. Hale leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against the desk. Did you notice anyone else around? Any cars following you? Liam thought about the figure he saw on the sidewalk. The memory sent a chill down his spine. He opened his mouth to mention it, but stopped. No, it was probably nothing, just a trick of the light. No, Liam said quietly. I didn't see anyone. Hale nodded slowly, closing the file. If you remember anything else, call me. He handed Liam a business card, his gaze lingering for a moment. And be careful, Liam. These things, they don't always end well. Liam swallowed hard, pocketing the card. As he left the station, Hale's words echoed in his mind. They don't always end well. That evening, Liam was back on his delivery route. The rain had cleared, but the sky remained dark and heavy. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every time he glanced in his rearview mirror, he expected to see a car following him. Every dark corner seemed to hide a shadow. Every sound felt too loud, too close. As he pulled into a customer's driveway, his phone buzzed again. Unknown number. His stomach clenched. Reluctantly, he answered. Hello? For a moment, there was nothing but static. Then, faintly, Liam. His blood ran cold. Who is this? More static. Then, you were the last to see her. Now you're next. The call ended abruptly. Liam sat frozen, the phone clutched in his hand. His heart pounded in his chest as his mind raced. Was it a prank? A cruel joke? But something about the voice felt familiar. Too familiar. That night, Liam couldn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table, the business card from Detective Hale resting in front of him. He turned it over in his hands, debating whether to call. But deep down, he knew no one could help him. Something was coming for him, something that couldn't be stopped. Around midnight, Liam finally crawled into bed, exhausted. The apartment was dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside his window. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the city. His mind drifted back to Emily's anxious face. Have you ever felt like you're being followed? Suddenly, a noise outside caught his attention. A soft, shuffling sound. Liam sat up, his heart racing. He walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. His breath caught in his throat. Across the street, a figure stood under the street lamp, tall, still, watching. The light cast long shadows, obscuring the figure's face, but Liam could feel its gaze locked on him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, the figure raised a hand and pointed directly at Liam. The figure didn't move. It stood perfectly still under the street lamp, its shadow stretching unnaturally long across the pavement. The light flickered, casting the scene in broken fragments of darkness and pale yellow glow. Liam couldn't breathe. His heart pounded in his chest as he gripped the windowsill, staring down at the motionless figure. Was it a man? A shadow? Something about it was off, unnatural. Slowly the figure lowered its hand. The gesture was deliberate, almost mechanical. And then, just as the light flickered again, the figure was gone. Liam stumbled backward, gasping for air. He rubbed his eyes, his hands trembling. Did I imagine that? He rushed back to the window, scanning the street below. The street lamp continued to hum, casting its weak glow across the empty sidewalk. There was no sign of anyone, but Liam couldn't shake the feeling. Someone had been there, someone had seen him, and whoever, or whatever, it wasn't gone. It was just waiting. Liam barely slept. When his alarm went off, he dragged himself out of bed, his body aching from exhaustion. The events of the night before clung to him like a fog, muddling his thoughts. He made a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the business card from Detective Hale. The voice from the phone call echoed in his mind. You were the last to see her, now you're next. Liam ran a hand through his hair, his fingers tugging at the strands. He needed answers. He couldn't sit here, waiting for something to happen. He couldn't let the fear consume him. With shaking hands, he dialed Detective Hale's number. Hale! The detective's voice was gruff, clipped. Liam took a deep breath, steadying himself. It's Liam Wells, the delivery driver. There was a pause on the other end. Liam, what can I do for you? Liam hesitated, his eyes drifting to the window. The street outside was quiet, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I think someone's following me. Hale's tone shifted, becoming more serious. What makes you say that? There was someone outside my apartment last night, just standing there, watching me. Another pause. And you're sure it wasn't just someone passing by? Liam shook his head, even though Hale couldn't see him. No, it wasn't like that. They were waiting for me. Hale sighed. I'll send a patrol car by your place tonight. In the meantime, keep your doors locked, and call me if anything else happens. After the call, Liam couldn't sit still. Something pulled him back to Harper Road, to Emily Price's house. He needed to know more. What was she afraid of? Why did she ask him that question? And why did she disappear the same night? The house looked even worse in the daylight. The paint was peeling and cracked, the windows coated in a thin layer of grime. The yard, overgrown and wild, seemed to crawl toward the house, like the earth itself was trying to reclaim it. Liam parked his car and walked slowly up the driveway, his footsteps crunching over wet gravel. The front door was unlocked. He pushed it open, stepping into the dark, musty interior. The air inside was thick with dust, and the smell of rotting wood hung heavily in the air. As he moved through the house, the silence pressed down on him. There was no sign of struggle, no sign that anything had happened here. Just emptiness. In the living room, a notebook lay on the coffee table. The cover was worn, the edges frayed. Liam picked it up, flipping it open to the first page. The handwriting was hurried, frantic. Notes, dates, and sketches filled the pages, but one word appeared over and over again. Watcher. Liam's pulse quickened as he flipped through the notebook. The entries were disjointed, jumping between descriptions of shadows, paranoia, and strange encounters. But one page stopped him cold. It was a sketch of a figure, tall, thin, faceless. And beneath the sketch, Emily had scrawled a message in bold, jagged letters. He won't stop until he finds a new target. Liam's hands trembled as he stared at the words. Suddenly, the floor creaked behind him. Liam spun around, his heart pounding. The room was empty, but the air felt different. He glanced at the window, his breath catching in his throat. There, on the other side of the glass, stood the watcher, still, silent, watching. Liam stumbled backward, his legs shaking. When he blinked, the figure was gone. Liam didn't remember leaving the house. His mind was a blur, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The journal sat on the passenger seat, its pages fluttering as the wind from the open window caught them. He won't stop until he finds a new target. Liam's thoughts spiraled. Emily was the target. Now it's me. As he pulled into his apartment complex, the street lamp outside flickered. Liam glanced in his rearview mirror. For a brief moment, he saw the watcher standing in the distance. Back inside his apartment, Liam locked every door and window. He pulled the curtain shut, blocking out the streetlight. But no matter what he did, he couldn't shake the feeling. The watcher was still out there. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the journal. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Liam's heart stopped. The phone buzzed again. He picked it up, his hand trembling, and answered. Hello? There was silence on the other end, then softly. Liam, it's your turn. Liam's hand shook as he gripped the phone. Liam, it's your turn. The voice was soft, distant, crackling through the static like a whisper from another world. It was his name, spoken slowly, deliberately. But the voice was wrong. It wasn't Emily. It wasn't Detective Hale. It wasn't anyone Liam knew. It was him. His own voice, twisted, warped, cold. Liam dropped the phone, stumbling back from the table. It hit the floor with a dull thud, the screen still glowing. He pressed his back against the wall, staring at the phone as if it might spring to life and attack him. No, 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 no. He grabbed his head, his thoughts spinning. Was he losing his mind? Was this paranoia? Or was someone, or something, really toying with him? The silence was unbearable, and then the knocking started. Tap, tap, tap. Liam froze. The knocking came from his front door, slow and rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't impatient. It was calculated. Controlled. Like whoever was on the other side knew he was already terrified. Liam stared at the door, his chest heaving. Don't open it. Don't open it. But something about the sound felt familiar. It tugged at a buried memory, something he couldn't quite place. And then he remembered. The knocking was exactly the same as the sound he'd heard at Emily Price's house. When he'd knocked on her door that night, it had echoed through the empty street. And now, someone was knocking the same way. Liam's blood ran cold. The knocking stopped. For a long moment, there was only silence. Liam stood there, his heart pounding in his ears. His gaze stayed fixed on the door, waiting for the knocking to start again. But instead, a piece of paper slid under the door. It was thin and yellowed with age, the edges frayed. Liam stared at it for a long time, before slowly approaching. He crouched down, his fingers trembling as he picked it up. There was a single word written on it, in bold, jagged letters. Watch! Liam stumbled backward, dropping the paper. Nah! His breathing quickened, and the walls of the apartment seemed to close in around him. The room felt too small, too dark. Suddenly, his phone buzzed again. He didn't want to answer it. He knew what he'd hear, but the buzzing wouldn't stop. Reluctantly, he picked it up and answered. Hello? There was no static this time, no whisper, just a chilling silence. And then, look outside. Liam's heart nearly stopped. He didn't want to look. Don't do it, just hang up. But his body moved on its own, driven by a terrible curiosity. He walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. The street was empty. The sidewalk was slick with rain, the street lamp flickering faintly. But just as Liam started to relax, he saw it. The Watcher. Standing across the street, perfectly still, perfectly silent, watching. Liam stumbled backward, his chest heaving. The figure didn't move. It didn't step closer. It just stood there, as if it had all the time in the world. Suddenly, the lights in the apartment flickered. The air grew cold, the shadows on the walls stretching longer, darker. Liam backed into the kitchen, grabbing a knife from the counter. His hands shook as he gripped it, the cold steel pressing against his palm. Suddenly, the phone rang again. Liam stared at it, dread pooling in his stomach. He didn't want to answer. He couldn't. But the ringing wouldn't stop. With trembling hands, he picked up the phone and brought it to his ear. This time, there was no voice. Just breathing. Slow, deliberate, and then, finally, I'm inside. Liam's blood ran cold. He spun around, knife in hand, scanning the dark corners of the apartment. The shadows seemed to move. Every dark space looked like it was hiding something. He backed toward the front door, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. The door was locked, but suddenly, it didn't feel like enough. Liam's mind spiraled. Was the Watcher inside? Was it a hallucination? Was he losing his grip on reality? The phone buzzed again, a new text message. He hesitated before opening it. The message contained a single image. It was a photo of him, taken through the window. Liam's heart stopped. He looked toward the window, his hands shaking. There was no one there, no sign of anyone. But when he glanced back at his phone, another message had appeared. It read, "Don't turn around." Liam froze. His entire body tensed as he stared at the words, his mind racing. There's no one behind me. There's no one behind me. But he couldn't shake the feeling. The air felt different, heavy, cold, charged. And then slowly, he turned. There, in the middle of his apartment, stood the Watcher, perfectly still, perfectly silent, watching. The Watcher stood in the middle of the room, unmoving. Its presence consumed the space, tall, thin, featureless. The dim light from the street lamp outside cast long, jagged shadows across the walls, making it seem larger than life. Liam couldn't breathe. His chest heaved as panic gripped his entire body. His knuckles turned white as he clutched the knife, holding it out in front of him like a lifeline. This isn't real. This isn't happening. But the figure didn't vanish. It didn't dissolve into a hallucination or fade like a bad dream. It was there, and it was watching. For what felt like an eternity, neither of them moved. Then slowly, the Watcher tilted its head. The movement was unnatural, mechanical, as if it were studying Liam like a curious animal. "What do you want?" Liam's voice cracked, barely a whisper. The Watcher didn't answer. It didn't need to. The silence was the answer, and the silence was worse than words. Suddenly, the lights flickered. The shadows on the walls twisted and stretched, creating grotesque shapes that seemed to crawl toward Liam. The Watcher took a single step forward. Liam backed up, his heart pounding in his chest. "Stay back," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I swear I'll—" The words died in his throat, because the Watcher wasn't moving anymore. It was closer now. Too close. Liam's mind spiraled. Flashes of Emily Price's anxious face flickered through his thoughts, like a broken film reel. Her words echoed in his mind, over and over. "Have you ever felt like you're being followed?" Suddenly, the memory twisted. In his mind's eye, it wasn't Emily anymore. It was himself, standing on that porch holding the pizza box, asking the question in his own voice. "Have you ever felt like you're being followed?" Liam shook his head, tears stinging his eyes. "This isn't real! It's not real!" But the memories kept twisting. He remembered knocking on Emily's door, but this time, when the door opened, there was no Emily. There was only the Watcher. It stood there in the doorway, silent and waiting. Liam stumbled back, clutching his head. No, that's not how it happened. But his mind wouldn't stop. The memories kept playing, looping, changing. The Watcher was always there, at Emily's house, in the street, in his apartment. It was always watching, and it always would be. Suddenly, the phone buzzed on the table. The sound was sharp and jarring, cutting through the suffocating silence. Liam stared at it, his breath quickening. He didn't want to answer. He couldn't, but the buzzing wouldn't stop. Slowly, with shaking hands, he reached for the phone. The screen read, "Unknown number." Liam pressed accept, lifting the phone to his ear. "Hello?" he whispered. The voice on the other end was calm, measured. "You know what happens next." Liam squeezed his eyes shut, his chest tightening. "Please," he whispered, "just tell me what you want." There was a pause. Then softly, "Watch." As the word echoed through the phone, the room around Liam began to shift. The walls warped and cracked, peeling back to reveal charred wood and blackened plaster. The air grew thick with the scent of smoke and decay. Liam backed into the corner, clutching the knife to his chest. The Watcher stood in the center of it all. The shadows flickered, and suddenly there were more figures, shapes moving in the darkness, watching, waiting, whispering. Liam covered his ears, tears streaming down his face. "Leave me alone," he screamed, but the whispers only grew louder. "You were the last to see her. You're next. Watch." Liam's knees buckled, and he collapsed to the floor. The shadows closed in around him, and the whispers faded into silence. Liam lifted his head, gasping for air. The apartment was empty again. Silent, normal. Except for one thing. The journal sat on the floor in front of him. He hadn't brought it inside. He'd left it in his car. But now it was here. Slowly he reached out, flipping it open. A new entry had been added. The handwriting was his. It read, "I saw her, I watched her, I followed her." Liam stared at the words, his mind reeling. No, I didn't. But as he flipped through the pages, the truth became clear. He wasn't just the last person to see Emily alive. He was the reason she was gone. Liam sat frozen on the floor, staring at the journal in his hands. The words on the page burned into his mind. "I saw her, I watched her, I followed her." It wasn't possible. He hadn't written that. Had he? The handwriting was his. The letters slanted the same way. The loops, the strokes. It was undeniably his. Liam's breath came in short, ragged bursts. No, this isn't real. But deep down, a part of him knew. It had always been there, the unease, the confusion, the missing memories. And now, the truth was clawing its way to the surface. Desperate for answers, Liam flipped through the journal's pages. Most of it was filled with Emily's frantic handwriting, notes about the Watcher, strange occurrences, and the feeling of being followed. But the farther he flipped, the more familiar the handwriting became. It was his, page after page, entry after entry. It wasn't just Emily's journal, it was his too. The entries were disturbing, fragmented. I see her every night. She doesn't know I'm there. She asked me if I felt it. She knows. I can't stop watching. Liam's hands trembled as he flipped to the final page. The last entry was short, just a single sentence. She had to disappear. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Liam jolted, his heart leaping into his throat. Tap, tap, tap. The same slow, deliberate rhythm he'd heard before. He stumbled to his feet, clutching the knife tightly in his hand. His mind raced. Don't open it! Don't open it! But the knock came again. Tap, tap, tap. And this time, a voice followed. Liam, it's Detective Hale. Liam crept toward the door, his body tense. What does Hale want? Why is he here? Taking a deep breath, he unlocked the door and pulled it open. Detective Marcus Hale stood on the other side. His expression was grim, his eyes locked on Liam. We need to talk. Liam hesitated. What's this about? Hale didn't answer. Instead, he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The two men stood in tense silence, the air between them thick with unspoken truths. Finally, Hale spoke. Emily Price, she's not missing, Liam. Liam blinked, his mind struggling to process the words. What do you mean? Hale's gaze didn't waver. We found her body this morning. Liam's stomach twisted into a knot. No, that's not possible. She was found near Harper Road, Hale continued, cutting him off. In the woods behind her house. Someone buried her there. Liam shook his head, his breathing quickening. I didn't do anything. I was just the delivery guy. You were the last person to see her alive, Hale said softly. His voice wasn't accusatory, it was almost sympathetic. And now, you're the only person who can tell us what happened. Liam stumbled backward, his mind spiraling. The journal entries flashed through his thoughts. I saw her. I watched her. I followed her. She had to disappear. I didn't write that, he whispered. I swear I didn't. Hale took a step closer. Then who did? Liam opened his mouth to respond, but he couldn't, because he didn't know. Or maybe, deep down, he did. Hale's voice softened. What's happening to you, Liam? You're not acting like yourself. Liam's eyes darted to the window. In the glass, he saw his reflection. But it wasn't just him. The watcher stood behind him, still, silent, watching. Liam spun around, but the room was empty. Liam dropped the knife, collapsing to his knees. I don't know what's real anymore, he whispered, his voice breaking. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Hale knelt in front of him, his expression calm but serious. It's not in your head, Liam. Whatever you're dealing with, it's real. But you have to tell me the truth. Liam's gaze flicked to the journal lying on the floor. It's all in there, he said quietly. The journal. It wasn't just hers. I've been writing in it too. Hale frowned, picking up the journal. He flipped through the pages, his expression darkening as he read. Finally, he closed it and looked at Liam. We need to go to Harper Road. The drive to Harper Road was silent. Liam sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window. The world outside seemed muted, the trees and buildings blurring together under the dull gray sky. Detective Hale gripped the steering wheel tightly, his gaze focused on the road ahead. Neither of them spoke. The journal sat on Hale's lap, its cover worn and stained. Liam couldn't bring himself to look at it. The words inside haunted him. They felt like a noose tightening around his neck. As they approached Emily Price's house, Liam's chest tightened. The house stood at the end of the road, just as he remembered it, isolated, crumbling, surrounded by dead trees. The driveway was slick with mud, the air heavy with the scent of rain and earth. Hale parked the car and turned to Liam. Are you ready? Liam nodded slowly, though he wasn't sure he'd ever be ready. They made their way toward the woods behind the house. The trees loomed overhead, their bare branches twisting like gnarled fingers. The ground beneath their feet was soft and wet, each step sinking slightly into the mud. As they walked deeper into the woods, Liam's mind raced, memories flickered, the knock at Emily's door, the sound of her voice, her question. Have you ever felt like you're being followed? The words played over and over in his head, like a broken record. And then, a new memory surfaced. Suddenly, Liam stopped, his breath caught in his throat as the memory unfolded, vivid and cruel. It was that night. The delivery. He remembered knocking on Emily's door, just as before. But this time, he remembered what happened after. Emily had opened the door, her eyes wide with fear. It's you, she'd whispered. Liam frowned. Excuse me? She stepped back, shaking her head. "You're the one. You've been watching me." Liam had laughed, confused. "I think you've got the wrong—" But she slammed the door, and as Liam stood there, stunned, something inside him snapped. He pounded on the door, harder, louder. "Open the door!" he shouted, his voice echoing through the empty street. The door didn't open. Liam's heart raced, his mind spun. Why was she acting like this? Why was she afraid of him? And then he realized something. She wasn't wrong. The Watcher. It wasn't someone else. It was him. He had been following her, watching her. He just hadn't realized it. Hale's voice snapped him back to the present. "Liam, over here!" Liam turned to see Hale standing near a clearing, pointing to a patch of disturbed earth. A shallow grave. Liam's legs trembled as he approached. The ground was uneven, muddy. The rain had washed away most of the dirt, revealing something beneath the surface. Emily's hand. Liam collapsed to his knees, his stomach twisting. He retched, gasping for air, tears streaming down his face. "No, no, no, no." Hale knelt beside him, his voice calm but firm. "You need to tell me the truth, Liam." Liam shook his head violently. "I didn't do this. I didn't—" But the memories wouldn't stop. He remembered grabbing the shovel. He remembered dragging Emily's body through the woods. He remembered the weight of the dirt as he shoveled it over her. She had to disappear. The words echoed in his mind. Liam sobbed, his hands clutching the muddy earth. I don't remember why I did it." But he did. Deep down, he knew. Emily had been right. She'd sensed it. She'd seen it. The darkness inside him, the Watcher. It had always been there. It wasn't a person following him. It was him. Hale stood slowly, his expression grim. "We'll need to take you in, Liam." Liam didn't resist. There was no point. He knew what he'd done, and he knew there was no going back. As Hale escorted Liam back toward the car, Liam glanced over his shoulder. The woods were still, silent. But just for a moment, he saw it. The Watcher. Standing at the edge of the trees. Still, silent, watching. And this time, it looked exactly like him. The ride back to the station was silent. Liam sat in the back of Hale's car, his hands cuffed in front of him. The cold metal bit into his wrists, but he barely felt it. His mind was elsewhere, spiraling through the fragmented memories of that night. He had buried her. He had watched her. And now, he couldn't deny it any longer. The Watcher wasn't a shadowy figure. It wasn't something following him. It was him. It had always been him. The car pulled into the police station parking lot, and Hale killed the engine. For a moment, they sat in tense silence, the rain pattering softly on the windshield. Hale turned, his gaze piercing but calm. "We'll figure this out, Liam." Liam shook his head, tears welling in his eyes. "There's nothing to figure out." Inside the station, Liam sat alone in a small interrogation room. The walls were bare and gray, the fluorescent light above buzzing faintly. He stared down at his hands, trembling slightly. Every time he blinked, he saw her face. Emily Price, the fear in her eyes, the way her lips trembled when she asked him, "Have you ever felt like you're being followed?" The door opened, and Detective Hale stepped inside, carrying the journal. He set it down on the table between them, the sound echoing through the quiet room. Hale sat across from Liam, folding his hands. "Tell me what happened." Liam stared at the journal, his mind racing. Finally, he spoke. I didn't mean to hurt her." His voice was barely a whisper, cracking with emotion. "I didn't even know what I was doing. It was like I was watching myself, like I wasn't in control." Hale leaned forward. "Watching yourself?" Liam nodded, his gaze distant. "It felt like someone else was pulling the strings, like I was just there, watching it happen." Hale tapped the journal with his finger. "And you wrote this?" Liam hesitated, his breath catching. "I don't remember writing it, but it's my handwriting." His voice broke as he continued. "I've been seeing things, hearing things. There's someone, or something, following me. It looks like me, it feels like me, but it's not me." Hale's expression darkened. "You're talking about the Watcher." Liam's head snapped up. "You know about it?" Hale nodded slowly. "We've seen cases like this before, people claiming they're being followed by something that looks like them. It starts small, paranoia, strange coincidences." Hale's gaze sharpened. "And then it takes over." Liam's heart pounded. "What do you mean it takes over?" Hale's voice was calm, measured. It's not an external force, Liam. It's you. It's the part of you that you've been ignoring. The darker side, the part that watches, the part that waits. Liam shook his head violently. No, I'm not a killer. Hale leaned back, his expression grim. You're not yet. Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered. Liam stiffened, his breath quickening. Did you see that? Hale didn't react. The lights flickered again, and then the shadows in the room shifted. A figure appeared in the corner, still, silent, watching. Liam's blood ran cold. It's here. Hale tilted his head, his expression oddly calm. What do you see, Liam? Liam pointed toward the corner, his hand trembling. It's the Watcher. It's right there. Hale leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Liam, there's no one there. Liam's breath came in short gasps. You don't see it? Hale shook his head. Liam turned back to the corner, his heart pounding in his chest. The figure stepped forward, moving slowly into the flickering light. And as it did, Liam finally saw its face. It was him. The same clothes, the same features, but the expression was empty, emotionless. The Watcher stared at him, its hollow eyes piercing through him. Liam's hands trembled. No, this isn't real? The Watcher tilted its head, mirroring Liam's movements. And then it spoke. It's time, Liam. Liam stumbled back from the table, tears streaming down his face. No, I'm not like you. The Watcher stepped closer. You've always been like me. Liam collapsed to the floor, sobbing. The lights flickered one last time, and when they steadied, the Watcher was gone. But Liam knew it hadn't left. It was inside him now, and it would always be. Weeks later, a new delivery driver at Pietro's Pizza gets an order to Harper Road. He drives through the empty streets whistling to himself. When he arrives at the house, he knocks on the door. The door opens. Liam Wells stands in the doorway, still, silent, watching. Have you ever felt like you're being followed? Liam asks, his voice cold. The driver frowns. No, why? Liam smiles faintly. You will. The end. Please subscribe if you have enjoyed this story.